I come bearing gifts today.
Okay.
Try to act surprised. I've brought you dessert. We didn't necessarily get lunch, but I've brought you dessert.
I'm going to pull out like a knife and fork here.
This is
how prepared I have
This
been.
is honey babka, which is a traditional Ukrainian dessert, often served at Easter time.
This looks great.
It's been prepared by the catering staff at Leinster House because they were serving a Ukrainian menu today in honour of the address of President Zelenskyy. And I said I'd bring some in, and I have no idea how this is going to taste. I presume, of course, because it's prepared by the Oireachtas catering team, I presume that it's lovely. It is vegetarian friendly.
They did have chicken Kyiv as well.
They did have chicken Kyiv today as well, and some potato cakes.
Oh, that's really good.
Lots of live radio.
Lift it up and show us.
Camera one there. Look at that.
That's lovely.
It's like I'm trying to describe what it's like.
Is there? I would like
Nice and sweet bread. But there you go.
Very nice.
Ukrainian cuisine. If anybody else has any other delicacies they want to send us our way,
do let us know.
we will consume on camera. Other people. I remember there was one time I was on the 6-7 o'clock show back in the day, and it was actually one of my first times on TV. And I was on, and Keith Duffy was on alongside me, and there was somebody baking some sort of cake in the kitchen for the cookery slot, and we were all given little bits of it, and he basically force-fed me on TV. He just shoved a lump of cake in my face, and I did not know how to react.
And that's how you got the job.
There you go, yeah. That's it. And I never left the place.
Hello, you're very welcome along to episode 3 of the Group Chat podcast. I'm news correspondent Zara King, and I'm joined by my fellow news correspondent Richard Chambers.
Hello. We're in the away grounds here today in the news studio, yeah.
This is like when the Dublin hurlers are allowed to play in Croke Park.
This is Parky Rin, yeah.
And political correspondent Gavan Riley.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello. You've just come out from the Dáil. Thanks for the cake.
I have just come out from the Dáil, which is where I brought the cake from, obviously, yes, because and this is why we're all in, well, two or three of us are in formal wear today. Richard, for the benefit of people watching, Richard is not at work today, which is why Richard has come wearing his...
Richard is casual Barbie today.
Still turned up.
Casual finest.
Commitment to the gig.
He did still show up. That is his level of commitment. So I've just come from Leinster House this afternoon. We're recording this on a Wednesday afternoon. We should say we're putting this out a little bit earlier than we usually would.
For a special reason.
Part of the reason why we're doing that is because today we had an address to the Dáil and Shannon sitting jointly, which is in itself a very rare thing, by the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Really busy day around Leinster House. It's the first time since COVID basically that we've had a full house and something ceremonial and a full public gallery and a full press gallery. I'm also the secretary of the press gallery, so it's especially busy trying to assign seating, and we had some Ukrainian media with us today as well, so it was all sort of very busy. But you often sort of fall into the trap of thinking that these moments are going to be very noble, real occasions of state where somebody is going to address you and that they're going to start off with a little bit of mollycoddling and talk about the great profound links between their countries. And you might have thought, it's 30 years last week since Ireland and Ukraine formally established diplomatic ties, and there wasn't any of that because Ukraine is a country at war. So Volodymyr Zelenskyy
Zelenskyy definitely just got straight into it. It was interesting to see that.
He did not have time to do mollycoddling and to say how great it was to be able to speak to us, and that it was sad it was under those circumstances. He was straight into it. Literally his first line was, so last night the Russians continued their bombardment and this is what they struck. And there really was no escaping just the gravity of what he was talking about.
I think you even see it from the video of effectively his Zoom call, how tired he looks now.
Yeah.
I think small talk is probably the last thing on his mind. Like, people will have seen the comparisons. I know we were talking about Zara.
There was photographs. I saw that there was photographs taken of Zelenskyy from literally a couple of days before the war broke out and only just very recently, and he looks like a completely different person. It really has taken a physical toll on him,
Yeah. So he was giving his address, and he largely sort of spoke about what Russia has been up to, and we will talk about that more a little bit later in today's podcast. But he was effectively calling on the rest of the world to basically make Russia a pariah state, saying that, we can't still allow businesses to think that the welfare of Ukrainians is less important than their own margins and their own bottom line. Russia cannot be involved in the circle of noble nations anymore, that it has to be completely basically excommunicated from the world, and basically calling on Ireland to do that. A little bit of a compliment for Ireland's humanitarian efforts so far, noting that Ireland is a militarily neutral country, but at least we had been there from the get-go, that there was no hesitation about which side of this Ireland was on for all of the humanitarian assistance Ireland has offered for the volume of refugees that were brought in, but really calling on Ireland, if it's possible, to do more to pursue the highest possible level of sanctions to try and basically extricate Russia from the international community.
I thought it was, when you were talking about him getting straight into it, I thought there was a couple of things that he said that were really shocking, just about the humanitarian situation on the ground there, when he talked about things like people being able to melt down the snow to be able to have water, and how because the weather had changed now they weren't able to do that. that was the reality of what he was really bringing to the table here today.
Which is a really important and sobering reminder, because, as I said, because especially for a lot of first-time TDs, this was the first time that they were in a packed house, and to have a packed public gallery, packed press gallery, even distinguished visitors gallery, and you could so easily sort of fall into the idea that this was going to be something a little bit more high level, but it wasn't. It was so immediately just down at the ground level of the conditions that people are enduring, that the shelters that they're taking refuge in all being bombarded, the hospitals that were attacked, the ambulances that were attacked, even going so far as to say that Russia is trying now to use hunger as a weapon, that they're literally depositing landmines in some of the fields that they're laying behind, because they want to sow such instability in Ukraine afterwards. They want any surviving Ukrainian government, he's alleging, not to be able to feed its own people, so that there would be permanent distrust and unease sown in that country.
What was the atmosphere like? So obviously, as you say, packed house. It was interesting to see some journalists who normally wouldn't wear a tie were wearing a tie today.
Yes. That's the rules of the gallery, with it, which I am notionally responsible for enforcing, even though I personally dislike those rules.
Did you send a text to that group chat this morning and be like, please wear a tie?
I didn't, but I did.
Wear your best.
I had to send a reminder, because there's a few non-full-timers who were visiting, who were always like to be able to bring in. I had to remind them that you had to wear a tie and that you weren't allowed to wear jeans.
Yeah. The question, though, I have is, like, when you have all these people who are there, obviously the Ukrainian ambassador, who we're all familiar with at this point, was there. There were people who are refugees from Ukraine were there as well. What was it like when the speech is on? Were you looking at them, and how were they reacting to it? Because we all hear the speech and we've seen it on the news, but it's a different thing for us to hear it as opposed to them. They've lived it.
To sort of see a real life sort of a test case environment where you see it landing for people. And yes, it is totally different, because you're not just watching it on a Zoom where you're looking at pictures of Micheál Martin and a side profile of him taking notes or looking very stoic. There's people in the room who have lived those experiences. There were about a dozen Ukrainian refugees in the public gallery, and then about 6 more in what's called the Distinguished Visitors Gallery. They were sitting there with the Ukrainian ambassador, and one of them was openly sobbing the whole way throughout. It actually reminded me a little bit, Zara, of what you said a few weeks ago when you were talking about the constant soundtrack to what you met at the border between between Ukraine, and Poland. That there was people who were just openly found the whole thing to be immensely distressing. That it should be, in any other circumstances, a point of great pride that the leader of your country is addressing the parliament of another country in which you are an emigrant or an expat. And these people just found it so moving, because the obvious emergency circumstances of all of this having to happen are so just abnormal. They are so out of the ordinary of what anyone would ever expect. And then not only for it to be, of course, an address by a leader in wartime, but a video address from a secure location with an interpreter while he's wearing his military fatigues, because he's never going to know when he might have to take shelter himself. Just everything about it is so far removed from what the normality of a full diplomatic address would be, and it was you could see it written on a lot of their faces. They found it very, very moving. And
I was speaking to his most senior advisor the day before. He did an interview with us just before the address to the Dáil, and he was telling me that Zelenskyy is on about 10 calls a day to 10 different countries. That's really been a big part of his job at the moment, is engaging with all these countries around the world. And I think what's really important, and what we kind of saw from that, is Zelensky's very clear in saying he doesn't want your sympathy, he wants your support. And that's really strong, isn't it? I mean, he's sort of saying, thank you for your kindness and compassion, but it's really not your sympathy. I mean, he said very clearly, I can't tolerate indecisiveness. He said he couldn't believe really that we still have to convince Europe, despite everything that's going on, to push on further sanctions. And also in terms of that application for membership to the European Union, that was a big part of it today.
Which at least is one thing that Ireland has been unequivocally in favour of, and even from the very get-go, Micheál Martin has always talked about, not even just for Ukraine, but for other countries in that part of the world, in that sort of that post-Balkanised world, that the way for them to embrace Western society, or the way to embed democratic values, as he sees it, is for them to be brought into the European family. So the likes of Montenegro and North Macedonia, he is fully in favour of countries like that being able to get involved in the European Union. Just a little bit more of what Volodymyr Zelenskyy said. He said that the connections of Russian banks with the financial system of the world needed to be blocked, so evidently looking for sanctions beyond what is already there. And he said, and this I think was quite telling when he said it, that the world has developed appropriate mechanisms a long time ago. Everyone knows what needs to be done. The only obstacle is the lack of integrity among individual leaders for now. Political leaders, business leaders, who still think that war and war crimes are not as frightening as financial damage, and calling on Ireland to be at the vanguard to change that attitude. Yeah, and there is still, I think, it's been interesting from my perspective to see how little talk there's been about financial services
in this country and Russia, and there have been people who've pointed that in the past, and yet it doesn't really seem to come into the conversation.
You were talking to us last week about Bill Browder, Vladimir Putin's number one enemy, and the point he was making about the Russian money in the IFSC, for example.
Exactly, and it's interesting as well that there was this conversation about, we hear today that there's more sanctions on the way from the EU, and one of the people being targeted is our friend Oleg Deripaska. He's the oligarch whose gaff was effectively broken into by protesters in London. He is the part owner of the parent company of Ognish Alumina in Limerick. So he's going to be on the sanctions list now. Like, that plant will still be open. But it's interesting that there's been a bit of what seems to be, from the outside looking in, maybe I'm wrong, but there has been a bit of foot dragging about, from an Irish perspective, of naming people. I don't think that's something which Volodymyr Zelenskyy would be too keen on. But he was quite complimentary too. I think we have a clip as well of his speech, just where he basically thanked the people of Ireland for what they've done.
And although you are a neutral country, you have not remained neutral to the disaster and to the mishaps that Russia has brought to Ukraine. I'm grateful to you, to every citizen of Ireland. Thank you for supporting sanctions against Russia. Thank you for the humanitarian and financial support extended to our country. And thank you for your caring about Ukrainian people who found shelter on your land.
So, Gavan, just in terms of the reaction to this afterwards, Sinn Féin's Mary Lou McDonald is now calling for the expulsion of the Russian ambassador. And
has been for a while. And actually, it's a very interesting point that you bring up, because that was the linchpin of Mary Lou McDonald's speech today. So the way it happens is that there are 10 Dáil groupings. There's the 3 parties that are in government, there's 4 opposition parties, and then there's 3 groups of independent TDs. And they all got a chance to nominate someone to have their say in response to what President Zelenskyy said. And there was a sort of a constant theme all day of there being like almost unanimity or almost unity on everything. So, for example, even when President Zelensky's speech finished, there was a full standing ovation. Well, at least everyone stood. There were a handful of TDs, mostly from people for profit, who didn't clap, because as they saw it, although they're standing in solidarity with the Ukrainian people, they weren't going to applaud a president who wants NATO to implement a no-fly zone, which could escalate a conflict, which could bring the world to the brink of nuclear war, and they just don't think that's the right way to go. So they wouldn't applaud. Then you had, just at the end of Eamon Ryan's speech, where Eamon Ryan was saying, we're going to stand with the people of Ukraine. This isn't going to be a short-term friendship. We're going to be in this for the long haul, and we will not let them down. And I spotted from the press gallery a moment where Mary Lou McDonald and Micheál Martin almost seemed to kind of nod at each other, that they were almost sort of saying, in a sense, yes, this is a long-term friendship that we're going to forge. And then Mary Lou McDonald stands up and says, we need to get rid of the ambassador, which is something that the 3 government parties, for now at least, are still saying we shouldn't tolerate. And then you had Richard Boyd Barrett, who, as I mentioned, didn't applaud, standing up and offering sympathies to the people of Ukraine, but also saying that there are plenty of other conflicts around the world that should get the same attention that don't, and calling basically for the world to demilitarise. Immediately followed by Cathal Berry, representing the independent group, with the regional independent
group.
Vocal
about,
It was very vocal about standing up, saying that we should have followed the lead of Sweden and Finland, who are neutral countries, but who armed Ukraine to help its own resistance, and saying we have a pile of anti-rocket missiles in the Curragh, an hour away, which are about to lose their shelf life, so why wouldn't we go and deliver them to them?
He also was very clear in saying that he just believed that this would be won on the battlefield, though. He had no doubt about that in his mind. His opinion was very much this is the only way it's going to be won.
Which is the real... the striking thing, because one of the things that was remarkable about him saying that is that the group of Ukrainian refugees and members of the Ukrainian community who I mentioned were in the public gallery. They applauded at that point. Cathal Berry said, we've got stuff an hour's drive down the road and it's all available to us, and it's about to expire. Let's put it to good use and help these people defend themselves. And they applauded, and there was only like a small smattering of applause from some of the deputies in the chamber, because neutrality is still a very sensitive talking point. Sure, but those in the gallery, who are a little bit closer to the literal front lines, were in unity at all of that. And there's one other thing which I just wanted to mention about that, because I will need to move on in a minute. We talked about the members of the Ukrainian community who were there. I couldn't help be struck by one little girl. There was a 5-year-old girl who was in the Distinguished Visitors Gallery, just a couple of rows behind the ambassador, whose name is Anastasia Samanova. She's originally from Donetsk. and she is a refugee. She's come here with her mother, Yana, from Donetsk. Her father, Lana's partner, is still in Russia trying to fight for effectively her homeland. And she got a shout out at the very end. Cahirlach of the Shannon, Mark Daly, gave her a little mention and said, that we're pleased to have you here, but we sort of regret that you have to be here. And it was really remarkable because I just sort of spotted her throughout the speeches, and she's a refugee in another country. She's in the Distinguished Visitors Gallery of a foreign parliament, which is, a very surreal place to be. But she's still she's 5 years old. Like, she had her hair tied up in pigtails. She spent a lot of the hour listening to speeches, colouring in on a colouring book, because it's a more stimulating thing for 5-year-olds than sitting in a foreign parliament listening to condemnations of war. And she was a rock star. Everyone wanted to go and get a picture with her afterwards. The Taoiseach did.
I saw the Taoiseach meeting her afterwards.
And she seemed like the happiest moment. I passed her again when I was leaving with my honey babka in hand. She was standing on the plinth on one of the little concrete bollards, asking her mother to take a photograph because she was just so entertained by standing up
and that's
on a
the
little perch. And that's what they've been robbed of.
And I was outside. I'm not working today, but I decided, this is a little bit of history. I'll go in, and I actually know a couple of people who wanted to be there, Ukrainians who we will have met. Each of us will have met. I met Pavlo, who was there, and he's taken in 2 families who he knows from Ukraine. It was great to see him again. But it really was. There was just a nice sort of, how's it going? How are you guys getting on? What's been new since last time I saw you? And that wasn't just to me chatting to them. That was to a few of them. Like, a lot of them will know each other from turning up at protests. This was a moment of solidarity. It's a different thing. But, oh my God, again, it's the kids as well. It's always the kids, as you always say, sort of, Zara, as well, is that the kids were out there, and as soon as Zelensky's speech was over, they burst into the national anthem. And it was just one of those hugely emotional things. I posted a clip up on Instagram and on Twitter about it, and it was just like, oh my God, you're seeing some of their parents are behind them, just wiping tears from their eyes. And it's one of those things where it's just like, you can't help but feel a bit of the emotion of the moment, but also you step back and you're like, holy God, how quickly the world has completely changed. And just to be there and to chat to some people who we've met, whose stories we've shared on the news, and for them to be like, wow, this is an incredible moment that we're here and we're talking about, what we've all been through and what this country is doing to try and help more people like us to get to safety. And I just think it was just a really, really kind of a special moment, really.
No, I think it was really important and really special. I think the kids, as you said there, speaking to Zelensky's senior advisor the other night, I just wanted to ask him, on behalf of those kids who go to bed at night wondering when will they see their father again, would there be an opportunity, if the war continues on for several months, to allow men to leave Ukraine? And he said, we're doing our best for those families, but really at the moment it's just not something that is even up for discussion. And I think that's incredibly, incredibly sad for those kids that they don't know. The family separation is the thing in all of this. It kind of gets lost sometimes.
It's one of the things that we often have to park when we're covering a humanitarian story as well as a geopolitical one, that you have to try and park your own emotions and be able to relay stuff factually. But I remember there was a couple of weeks ago where for another job that I do for a radio show, that I was talking to a Ukrainian MP, Lesia Vasilenko, who for the second time in 9 months had to hand over control of her baby, who's not even a year old, and have the kids brought to a safe place and not know when, if ever, she'll see them again. And I remember just off air saying, we can often work unpredictable and fairly wild hours in this job, and you miss a lot of bedtimes and stuff and you feel guilty about it. But the idea of handing them over and not knowing when you're going to see them again, and that being done on a national industrial scale. Did
you see the pictures are actually the picture of it's gone viral. It was up by the PA, the Press Association News Agency did it. This mother basically wrote the kid's name and the numbers in the back.
Her date of birth. Wrote. The child was only 3, I think, and the mother had written the date of birth and contact numbers for not just her but extended family members in case that the mother was killed, that if the child was found that they could call a next of kin. So she had written in biro on the back of the child's body.
And we're only 6 weeks in.
Only 6 weeks in.
One of the things about images like that is that people can often be very sceptical about the truth of them, which probably brings us to our guest today. We're very, very lucky on the podcast today to be joined by Malachy Browne, who's a visual investigations editor and a Pulitzer winner. That's a way to start. That's a way to start for a first guest, isn't it? On the group chat. So we spoke to him before we came on, and we started by asking him just to talk us through the process of trying to establish fact from fiction in an environment like this.
So we're joined now by our first official group chat guest. He is the video investigations journalist with the New York Times, Malachy Browne. Malachy, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
So first of all, can you tell us a bit about the work that you've been doing, particularly on the situation in Ukraine, Malachy?
Yeah, our work on Ukraine began before the war started. In fact, we had a team over there on the ground along the front lines, documenting the preparations, that the Ukrainians were making, and also just, monitoring those satellite images that were coming out that everybody saw in the lead up to the war. And then when it started, so much of it was being documented and captured by Ukrainian citizens right across the country. That first night, there was a barrage of missiles that hit multiple cities right across Ukraine, even right over 150 kilometers from the Polish border. And so we were frantically trying to collect and verify and publish what we knew about what was happening. We had, journalists in various cities on the ground as well, so they were feeding back. So it was very much a breaking news story for the first few weeks. In fact, we sent some of our team over to Europe so that we would have 24-hour coverage. And so that was it. It was collecting these, nuggets of information and visuals that were emerging from across the country so that we could document what was happening and verify that information and combine it with the reports from our correspondents on the ground. And then over the last couple of weeks, we've been, as the intensity of that has sort of eased off a little bit, we've been doing more deeper dive stories.
Malachy, can I ask then, when you get to that process and you find a video that's interesting from someone who is in Ukraine, how do you begin that process then of investigating whether it's real, what it actually says about the situation? Because we've been talking about Bucha, and that's obviously been a very, very high profile situation, which you guys have been able to verify. So could you show us about that process of how you go about that from when you see that first video that starts things off?
It begins, with your preparation before the event happens, actually. So in the weeks beforehand, we're lucky enough to have a couple of Ukrainians on our team. And in the weeks beforehand, we were also collecting the Telegram channels of towns and cities across Ukraine and monitoring those. And in the course of doing that, you kind of get a good sense of what's a good source of information and what, the more sketchy ones. And so I'm building Twitter lists as well, doing the same on other platforms, watching community Facebook groups and things like that. So you have some sort of sense of the quality of the information, but you still need to vet every one. And it's the old practice that we used to do back at Storyful when I was working there, up to 2014, was where did this happen, when did it happen, and who's posting it? Now in Ukraine, it's difficult sometimes to establish who's posting it. Because a lot of the towns are aggregators and people are filing in content. But as I say, you get a sense of what a good source is. And the other ones then are, comparing it with satellite imagery or Yandex imagery. Yandex is quite good for Ukraine, and the equivalent of Google Street View. Archival photographs that people have uploaded on Flickr or onto those platforms and tagged in those locations so that you're confirming where it is. And then establishing when this happened. I mean, we're relying on our correspondence, weather reports, and then cross-corroboration with, say, live streams of the cities and other sources of information. So it's never one sort of source. It's always like, who's your second source, who's your third source, and stacking all of these little factoids that give you confidence in a particular piece of content or information. And that can be useful as well, not just in, just very quickly, not just in those images, but in characterizing how we're presenting what's happening and what the headline should be on the homepage at the New York Times as well.
Malachy, you mentioned a lot of the satellite imagery that you use, and that would be, new to a lot of people. People might have thought of using Google Street View, but they would never think of having some sort of satellite imagery. Do you have open source access to some satellite imagery, or where do you get that from so that you can use it for comparisons? And do you ever wonder, given the amount of misinformation that's going on, whether some of the imagery that you're being fed to use as a reference point is actually true itself?
Yeah, good question. We have a satellite expert on our team, Christoph Kotl. He was one of the first hires onto the team 5 years ago. And he has built relationships with Planet and Maxar Technologies. And so we have access to their proprietary platforms and imagery. And so, the question on Sunday was, is what Russia is saying true? Because photographers got in there on April 1st and documented these bodies. They weren't able to access them prior to that, but the satellites are imaging that every day, circling Bucha and other parts of the world, taking photographs. And so by going back through March, I was able to match, basically see the bodies on the street in the exact position in which they were found on April 1st. And those images, they weren't the highest quality. So then I contacted Maxar, and they very quickly sent other images that they hadn't published that were much clearer and higher definition. And you could see the orientation of the bodies. You could even see the clothes, the shade of the clothes on one of the victims. And so this was absolutely, those bodies on those streets for weeks. And critically, at the time when Russia was in control of the area, and that rebutted their denials of the denials that they were there at the time that these atrocities happened.
And Malachy, so often we hear that saying truth is the first casualty of war, and you talked there about getting a sense of a good source. How does one get a sense of a good source in a war zone in a situation like that? Whether over time their information stands up, or whether they are, to use my old colleague Gavan Sheridan's phrase, scraper McScrapey, where they're just ripping stuff from all over the internet and just pushing it out there without any fact checking. So that's what you do. You just judge the quality of the information by your own independent reporting, whether they're a good source or whether but you need to fact check everything anyway. So it just helps you in that first step, and to cut through sort of the fog of war and the chaos of all of that information, because there's a lot of it coming out.
And when you see Russia, Malachy, when they actually call out your work, like state media in Russia has shown some of the satellite imagery that you've used in your investigation to prove what happened in Bucha, and they're just calling it a flat lie. How do you guys react when that happens? Because you obviously have a familiarity. You've won your Pulitzer for your work in identifying a Russian strike on a hospital in Syria. So you're familiar with the handiwork here. How do you react then, I suppose, when they call you out and just, despite all the evidence in the world, are saying, no, this isn't us?
Well, we respond to it if they provide facts and evidence to counter it. We'll examine that, absolutely. But even yesterday, the Russian UN ambassador at the Security Council was calling it, lies on that platform. And in fact, such was their outrage that they were being accused of association with these killings, that they called for an emergency United Nations meeting. But that's the kind of the Russian playbook that we've seen over the years. They will sort of manufacture their evidence, or to quote Kellyanne Conway, use alternative facts to present some sort of narrative and just outright, deny it, but without any actual evidence. And so there's only so much attention that you pay to that, and you just kind of continue to do your work. To get back to your other question about whether you can prove these satellite images are from that particular day, you can. There are scientific shadow calculators for a certain place at a certain time on a certain day, and you can see the lampposts that are there, and so you can do a quick calculation on that, and even there are websites that allow you to go to that location and show what the shadow would be like, and then match up perfectly. And all of these satellites send the metadata, the hour, minute, and second that they took the image when they're being up there, when they're being posted. But I don't know if you saw last night, we also posted pretty conclusive video. Well, it's absolutely conclusive video of the Russians firing on a cyclist along that same street as they turned the corner. So that's very difficult for the Russians to deny.
It's really interesting, just the process behind it. It is like putting a jigsaw together. Can you tell us a little bit about how your team works together? I mean, you must have a particular personality type to be the sort of person who's able to sort of find these things and look for that needle in the haystack.
Yeah, we have a great team. It's an international team, and a mix of backgrounds and language skills, and then technical competencies in terms of the reporting. This is quite a technical type of reporting. and then we have video editors and animators as part of the team. But it's a very collaborative process, and so it requires a certain sort of approach and personality, if you like. Folks who are not fighting each other for the byline and that kind of stuff. So, it's kind of the open source community where, you share your information and you work together to solve that jigsaw puzzle as you describe. So it's, animators, editors, story producers, and script writers, as well as the reporters then, who are quite adept at just kind of turning over rocks all over the web and finding information. 2 weeks ago, the team published intercepted radio communications, again, this time of Russian soldiers on the ground in Ukraine. You'll remember that they destroyed some communications towers. They would have required those for their secure communications, and so they were forced onto open frequencies that could be recorded and intercepted, and even people could join the conversations. And we were able to verify those recordings by matching it up with what the Russians were doing on the ground. And there's evidence also of potential war crimes in there where they're saying, let's withdraw our property, our armor, and we're going to bomb that civilian area. They also talk about their logistical problems and their problems getting supplies and whatnot.
Well, Malachy, thank you so much for joining us. I think we all agree the work you're doing right now is very important, and we really appreciate it. And thanks to you and your team. Thanks for joining us in the group chat.
Thanks, Malachy.
Thank you.
Thanks for the interest.
I just think he's just a fascinating guy, is Malachy. I mean, I've known him for maybe 11 years now. Used to write a few articles.
You worked with him?
I wrote a few articles. Not great articles, pretty poor articles, I'll say.
Was a student journalist, Richard?
I was definitely a post-student journalist, but he's always been just a fascinating guy.
And he went on to win a Pulitzer, and you went on to get force-fed by Keith Duffy.
I know. It's swings and roundabouts. The crossroads of our lives have taken us to different places. Just a fascinating guy. And really, it's just that dogged thing, because I think that there's been so many questions, which I think each of us have probably gotten. Yeah. And it's interesting, it depends on what platform you're on, just the level of questioning of things. And people are right to question things, but there is definitely a huge sort of swathe of misinformation that is out there. And having people like Malachy, like his team, and there's other units around the world who are doing a similar job of trying to verify things, I think it's a hugely beneficial thing, and I think it's great to have him on.
No, I totally agree, and I think it's really interesting and really important, because obviously in the jobs that we do, we hear about the type of work that Malachy does and we understand it, but I suppose for other people, so often we hear people talking about like fake news and how can you believe what you read online. Somebody like Malachy coming in and telling us that they can measure the shadows or the weather or things like that it's so clever, the work they do is so clever.
Which actually reminded me that some of our camera crews do use technology like that sometimes, that some of them, we said that this is great. Off air we spoke to Malachy and said, like, this is great for nerds, because nerds love all this sort of triangulation stuff. Some of our camera crews do that. People love in the podcast when we sort of bring them behind the curtain a little bit. Yeah. Some of our camera crews use apps like that to figure out that if they're going to be at a certain location at a certain time of day and they're not familiar with it, like if you're going abroad and you might just be filming on the side of the street and you need to check what the cameras or the shadows are going to be like, they actually use apps to figure out how much in shadow you're going to be, or whether you're going to have the sun in your face, and therefore then they figure out what lights to bring, or do they need to bring some sort of shadow kit or extra panel lights to work it all out. So it does have its other applications, as well as trying to verify genocide on an industrial scale.
Really interesting.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to move on, guys. We're going to talk a little bit about the big significant win, I suppose, for Graham Dwyer this week, Richard. Convicted killer Graham Dwyer winning that legal battle in an attempt to have that murder conviction overturned. You were covering that this week. What exactly happened? So
this is the Court of Justice of the European Union. This was not unexpected. We had a sort of a preliminary opinion given by one of the court's most senior advisors, and it basically rhymed exactly with what we heard earlier on in the week from the Court of Justice of the European Union. That is basically that Ireland's law, which governed and allowed for the collection and retention of mobile phone data, which was very, very central to the conviction of Graham Dwyer for the murder of Elaine O'Hara, that sort of general and indiscriminate, to use their words, retention of that data, whether it's location data, traffic data, metadata is the overall umbrella term, that basically is invalid. You can't do that. So a lot of people have been asking, what does this mean then for his appeal to the Court of Appeal here in Ireland? So there's two things to this. This decision by the Court of Justice of the European Union is going to go to our Supreme Court. They're likely to go, well, we have to go along with that. But the most important, the most pertinent question, I think, for most members of the public is what it means for his actual appeal against his conviction. Now, there's a couple of different legal opinions on what this will actually mean for that, because there's been previously some important legal judgments on this. That basically there's an important Supreme Court judgment in this country here from 2015, which meant that even if, as we heard from the Court of Justice of the European Union, evidence might be inadmissible, that it can still be used if the people who gathered it, i.e. the Gardaí, gathered it in good faith, or that was inadvertently in breach of the law. So basically they used the law of the land, and the guards did.
So the evidence that you've gathered could in hindsight have turned out to be gathered illegally, but if the guards, whoever's prosecuting, didn't know that at the time when they gathered in good faith, and the prosecution was based on that it could still stand.
It's clear to run at that point.
Yeah, the principle is there in Irish law. Also, the Court of Justice...
But it means as of yesterday, information gathering...
This is, and I think this is actually, because I think obviously we are focused on this from the perspective of Graham Dwyer's legal battle.
Case, but it's the broader implications.
That's actually one of the most interesting things about it, Zara, is that actually from speaking to some guards who I know have been working in this broad area now for a long time, they think their jobs have completely changed. And it actually isn't even just here. There was 12 or more different countries of the European Union which were interested in this case, and they made submissions into it because they were very concerned that it's going to be very hard in this day and age when so much is dependent on what happens with phones, how hard it can then be to secure convictions when so much of investigations depend on that data. So there was a huge amount of eyeballs across Europe on this. Legal experts they have different opinions on what it will actually mean for Graham Dwyer's appeal. But it will change, really, the job of the guards. We've already heard from Helen McEntee yesterday about this, saying this is going to feed into new legislation here. It's a big turning point, I think, in how evidence is gathered for prosecutions. Mobile phone data will still be a key part of it, just that it won't be able to go for, you can stretch back.
Which is
2
actually,
years
it's remarkable when you consider that there were 12 other countries that were sort of had listening briefs or who were so invested in the case, because, okay, yes, it may be Graham Dwyer's individual prosecution is the way, as you say, that we're all kind of framing this because that's what's brought it up. But if those 12 other countries feel like a potential future crime might be harder to prosecute because they may not be able to use somebody's mobile phone records to triangulate their whereabouts, then that's an issue for the prosecution of crime. I mean, on the flip side, it's also a bit of an issue for civil liberties, because if you don't commit a crime, is it still fair enough for the state to basically have a record of everywhere that you've been for a couple of years? Because that's effectively what your mobile phone, geolocation data amounts to. Yep. So, there is a bit of a balance, but it's going to be fascinating to see how it does come out in the wash. And it's already been such a long-running appeals saga that now it has to go back, having already been to one of Europe's highest courts, has to go back to Ireland's highest court and then go to the Court of Appeal beneath that to see what the consequences will be. It'll be going on for a while yet, I think.
This one...
I think this is going to be really interesting, actually, to see how this one plays out. Really fascinating. OK, we're going to move on to a story that, I'm going to be honest, totally passed me by this week.
I'm actually stunned. No, sorry, I want to make the point there. I can't believe the Bella Hadid, Richard Boyd Barrett thing passed you by. I have no idea how that happened. How did that happen?
Did it pass you by?
No, he's so into it. You were so... Sorry, Richard was horrified yesterday.
I was actually amazed. I was just amazed.
I just realised that I don't follow Bella Hadid on my work Instagram, which I'm on all the time. So I missed a lot of this.
It's a real breakdown of business and pleasure, you know what I mean? Sorry, Bella.
I don't follow Bella Hadid on my work Instagram, so I didn't see this. And I loved your reaction yesterday. You were absolutely... You almost unfriended me yesterday when I told you that I didn't.
I was really surprised.
So just for people who don't know... Bella Hadid appears to be quite pally with Richard Boyd Barrett, which is completely bizarre.
Rewind for squares like me who actually don't know who Bella Hadid is, or who didn't before.
Well, Bella Hadid is one of the most famous supermodels in the world.
One of the biggest models on the planet.
Victoria's Secret's model, done loads of campaigns. Her sister is Gigi Hadid. Their mother is Yolanda, who was a Real Housewife of Beverly Hills. They're
Gigi was formerly with Zayn from
Malik.
One Direction.
That's all over now. They're not together anymore. Yeah. Bella Hadid also dated The Weeknd.
Yeah.
You know this.
I do know this. This is why I'm here. I'm checking facts.
Everyone would think that I know loads about pop culture when, incidentally, I actually... How bad am I? I know nothing about pop culture.
Richard names... Your strongest point. It wouldn't be your strongest point.
It's not my strongest point. Richard would name celebrities and I'd be like, I don't know.
So Bella Hadid has 50 million or so?
Let's just say she's really famous. She's really
following.
Big
Instagram.
But the thing about it is, she's half Palestinian. Her dad is Palestinian. She's very much into...
Mohammed Hadid.
Yeah. Very much into sharing sort of postings about the situation in Palestine. she appears to have come across Richard Boyd Barrett. And I had this theory, and I was like, I felt like...
How do you think she came across Richard Boyd Barrett?
This is the thing, because this has been confirmed. No. This is my Hercule Poirot moment, where I was sitting there, and I actually said it to people in this newsroom there a few days ago. It's like, I think I know how she came across him. Because Richard Boyd Barrett had a speech in the Dáil.
That sounded like an impression that you do of a certain politician. The way
I don't know who that was then.
I'll tell you.
I'm going to wait after. The point is, Richard Boyd Barrett had a speech not so long ago, which went mega viral. It's the situation on the comparative reactions of the West to Ukraine and the situation in Palestine. And I think Al Jazeera and Middle Eastern Eye, a lot of these big websites which focus in on Middle Eastern issues, they blew it up. This went huge. Like I've never seen an Irish political speech get as many retweets and stuff like that. So I think, and it has since been, I think, confirmed by Richard Boyd Barrett himself, that this is how Bella Hadid stumbled across Richard Boyd Barrett, and a great partnership and coming together.
Which is one thing, but then so she was sharing last week a separate post by Richard Boyd Barrett to do with animal welfare.
She must have been scrolling back, is what I'm saying. Like, you know,
hang on a second. Is she just a full-blown supporter?
She hashtagged. I think she hashtagged people before profit.
Next, sorry, can we just say Richard Boyd Barrett is not a stranger to celebrity, Gavan? I mean, he isn't.
No, he's not. Fair to say, Richard is quite open about being adopted, and his birth mother is the actress Sinead Cusack, and he's got a very profound links to the rest of the Cusack family, a very well-known artistic family. Richard is often actually, it's not often highlighted because Richard is very vocal on other things, but Richard is a very vocal supporter in Dáil and of the arts as well, and the need to secure performing artistry. He was very vocal throughout the pandemic about what we were going to do to safeguard the arts when you couldn't have theatres and audiences in concert venues and the likes. But Richard was asked this yesterday. Richard and the rest of people before profit were on the Plinth at Leinster House on Tuesday, where he was, of course, inevitably asked about this.
How could you not ask him?
This most curious Venn diagram overlaps between himself and Bella Hadid, and he confirmed, yes, his theory being that she saw one of his previous Palestine videos and followed him for that reason.
Does he get who she is? Like, does he understand this?
Let's play people the clip, because he doesn't sound hugely overwhelmed by the fame of his new follower.
I wasn't aware of Bella Hadid, but it would appear she's an activist and an advocate on behalf of Palestine and women's rights and progressive causes. So I'm very glad to have made contact with an activist, and I'm always keen to meet activists who are campaigning on similar issues to ourselves, and I did send back a message thanking her for the follow and the share, and just saying I'm always glad to be in touch with activists who campaign on similar issues to ourselves.
She hasn't gotten back yet?
I honestly don't know, to be honest. I don't know. I mean, to be honest, we've a lot on our plate in terms of issues to campaign for, so I know it's of entertainment value to people out there, but I think I'm more focused on the campaign issues, and it would seem Bella Hadid is focused on the substantial issues rather than the glamour of it all.
Okay, hang on a second. So Richard Boyd Barrett slid into Bella Hadid's DMs. Is that what's happened here?
Not like the parliamentary way of saying it.
Yeah. The parlance of our times, yes.
This is an unbelievable story.
To thank her for sharing his content.
Did he? Did he get a response?
No. No.
Left on red by Bella Hadid.
Two blue ticks.
That could be a political memoir title for Richard Boyd Barrett. I just think it's fascinating. It is a nice little bit of likeness.
Do you think you could ask her to be on the pod, actually? Let's see.
We could get into it in
Gav, put a request in for that, will you?
I will get
Let us know next week how you get on with that. Excellent. Okay, finally, this week, guys, I want to talk a bit about the situation at Dublin Airport. Slightly improved.
Yeah.
But still an absolute nightmare.
Yeah. Well, my parents were in Dublin Airport on Saturday morning for a holiday abroad. They haven't had many since the pandemic started altogether. And they were in the airport for a flight. I think it was sometime between 8:30 and 9. They were in the airport at like 4:30. They were in the queue at 20 to 5, and they didn't get through the queue until 5:25.
That's interesting. What day of the week was that?
It was either Saturday or Sunday morning. I can't remember which, but either way, it was a weekend morning, which is busy period. But even still, you would think, and this is the theory that and maybe you'll tell us otherwise, because I know you've been doing a bit on this as well. But you would think that the airport always knows, with a reasonable amount of notice, how many passengers there are going to be on any given morning. Of course, weekends are busier because there's casual tourism. But you'd think they'd know a bit in advance, this is going to be a busy weekend, let's get more staff on. And even the weekend just gone, where they had more staff on and they opened the gates earlier than they usually would, still a 45-minute delay at 20 to 5 in the morning to get through with your 100 millilitre bottles.
I'm just really glad that I don't have a flight booked at the moment, because you know what I'm like. I mean, I used to leave when we lived in Castleknock, I would leave the house at the airport like an hour before the flight. I was a disgrace.
I'm the opposite. I have that Irish dad mode of like, I need to get there 3 hours early, even if there is no delays at security. I need to be there, damn it, just to be sure.
Like every transatlantic flight, you just need to be there.
I'm the total opposite.
Different vibe.
I'm just like, why would you? There's no need for extra time.
Obviously it was a situation when I was actually going over to London. I was there super early. It was sort of an 8 o'clock flight. I got there like 3.5 hours early. I even booked the fast track. Didn't use the fast track. Didn't need it. We were through in 10 minutes.
I couldn't cope with you now. That
and
would drive me insane.
I'll just sit around. So,
I have been burnt with that before, where I've booked fast track and then turned out to be just entirely a nonsense because there was literally no queue.
But the thing about it is that there has been a bad situation there at Dublin Airport. It was at its worst, not last weekend, the weekend before last, when people sent in a load of footage of just massive queues. 300 people missed their flights on that weekend, which is an awful situation. Obviously, we're heading towards Easter holidays and then summer holidays. So the busiest time is still ahead of us. And all this actually dates back to COVID. So this all goes back to when, in the middle of the pandemic, the air industry was completely just slammed. There was no need. So people, basically about 1,000 people left Dublin Airport in that time. A lot of them were security. So now Dublin Airport's starting the process of, okay, well now things are getting back to normal. We need to get more staff in again to run our security checkpoints.
And it's such an important job. Like, you and I spoke about this today. It is such an important job, and yet the terms and conditions of that job are very precarious.
Yes, and this is something which DAA is getting a lot of criticism for in the Dáil, in that basically the terms of the contracts which are available to security staff are a guaranteed 20 hours a week, but you might have 40. So you're guaranteed 20.
So hang on, you only get paid for 20, but you have to hang around and be
No,
available.
you'll be paid for what you work.
But you need to be available in principle.
You need to be available, so that basically you can't do other things in those other 20
Yeah,
hours.
exactly,
Because you have to, and you're not getting paid, so you're on call effectively without getting paid for being on call.
I don't know that specifically.
Well, as in, you have to be available for 40 hours.
Well, yeah, exactly, yeah. You can work all of these sort of like mad hours. It's mad hours, and you work bank holidays, and you work weekends.
You could be there 20
Exactly. All these mad people like myself who are there super early, and you have to be there to be pleasant and all that sort of stuff. But this is the thing, and this is actually the point that the SIPTU, the union who represents them, is making, is that you work unsociable hours. You have only 20 hours guaranteed. You can be working up to 40. Plus the rate of pay is just over €14 an hour. And that's it. That's your top rate. So that doesn't matter if you're working at 4 a.m. in the morning or you're working the bank holiday or whatever. So I asked Dublin Airport about this. They said, we're competitive, we're hiring aggressively, and we have loads of staff who've been here for many years, and they're all quite happy to be here. But it is a situation, you are starting to see a lot more criticism of Dublin Airport for how they're handling this. Some other airports and some people connected to other airports across the country have seen Dublin Airport become just this behemoth, this giant, which is basically the hub for Ireland. Yeah. They're like, send people our way, because we're crying out for passengers and have been in Shannon and Cork for years and years and years. But it's a situation that it has improved, as you sort of say, Zara, in that they've put some things in place. People from other areas of the airport are being moved in to help out with people who are queuing. They've opened the security gates, as you're saying, Gavin, a little bit earlier. But the true test isn't coming until you get to holiday period. And they're still short on the staff of what they need. They have a 6-week training process and examinations at the end, which means that even if you're trying to hire someone for these jobs, you can't guarantee that they're going to pass the exam.
They're not going to be in place for Easter weekend, which is 9 or 10 days time from the time
this is
that's going to be the real pressure.
This is going to be
that's a 4-day weekend where you could have, I mentioned, surely you know how many people there's going to be, but there could be a lot of people who will be on the cusp of a 4-day weekend and then just decide on a whim to go and fly at the last minute. And if the airport can't budget for that, then how are they really supposed to be able to make sure that the staffing is appropriate for the whole workload they have?
But even I noticed when we were going to the Ukrainian border just a couple of weeks ago, I mean, even going through the airport, whatever about security, that was fine, but at the time when we were going through, there's no staff in any of the shops out there. Like, it's very difficult to get served at a counter, I found in my personal experience. And I needed to pick up something, and there was, various different counters in the cosmetics area, and they were kind of like, oh, sorry, is there someone working on this counter? And there was like one person manning like 3 or 4 counters, and they were like, oh yeah, look, we just like lost a load of staff during the pandemic, and they're not back yet. So that was just an experience I had going through the airport, where I just thought it was interesting that it doesn't just seem to be security, that I think across the board the airport is understaffed.
If you were flying for work, did you still only show up like an hour before flight time?
No, I didn't. Joni, so Joni won't mind me telling you this. Yeah. Joni's like you.
Joni's a camera operator.
Joni's our camera operator who I was with. Joni's like you. So Joni and I, when we were coming back, it was so funny. She won't mind me telling you this. She would be like, okay, we have to go get in the queue for the flight. And I'm like, but like we picked our seat, like, so we don't have to get in the queue. And she's like, got to get in the queue. And
is this actually queuing for the plane?
Home. Yeah, like so we were going through the airport. Well, obviously
when you're boarding,
But if you have assigned seating,
but not even just the assigned. In general, she just would obviously prefer to be there way in advance. Whereas I'm like, we've loads of time. Like when you're traveling with
have you ever missed a flight?
I was going to ask.
I've never missed a flight.
That's pretty good.
Despite being such a frantic.
I am a disaster with these things, but I've never missed a flight. I don't know how I've never missed a flight. Like, obviously it's coming to me. Like, I'll probably miss the next flight.
Do you stand up in queue? This is the point I was trying to ask with there. When they call people for boarding, do you stand up in queue at that point?
At all. I'm the last.
People have strong feelings about this, I found.
No, but that's it. So Joan and I were travelling together. When you're travelling with people and you're so different, I'd say I was driving her mad. Like, because we were having like a bite to eat and we were sitting down and she's like, we better go down to get to the plane. And I was like, no. I was like, sure, we have our seats booked. Like, and it was so funny. So she went way ahead of me. But then because she was in the queue, I ended up catching up with her.
And join her, did you?
No, I would never do that now. No, I'd rather just be the last person. I don't want to sit on the plane for any longer than I have to.
The only point, and I'd actually completely agree with you on I'm not queuing. I'm not standing and queuing in a pointless queue. We're all getting on the plane anyway.
COVID and everything, I was a bit like,
but the only counterpoint to that is the overhead bins.
Yes.
And
in fairness to Joan, she had so much stuff obviously as well, so I could understand where she was coming from with that.
The other thing actually that irks me about planes is not so much the queuing up, because I get the demand for the overhead bins and you don't want to have your stuff halfway down the plane because you get on late.
I like having my handbag under my seat and they let you keep it under your seat if you're late on. So it's actually great.
Oh, you've gained the system. No, but people who, when at the end of the flight and then it goes bong and you can take off your seatbelts and everyone goes and stands up and there's nowhere to stand. So you're just doing this, like basically everyone's standing up like this, wondering when they're going to be able to fully extend their spines.
I hate it.
Why would you do that?
I hate it. It's the worst. That is actually the worst, and that's worse than the queuing on the way in. Is that everybody stands up on the plane at the end, and everybody's like, as you say, crouched over, their head bumping off the overhead lights and fans, and like just queuing. And it's especially if it's there's only one door in the plane, and everybody from the back is already standing up, and it's like you're going to be waiting a long time. Sit down. It's going to be fine.
Jets, lads.
But I've never missed a flight. I find the whole travel thing, and as you can probably see by how animated I am on the subject, I find it extraordinarily stressful. And the worst moments of my life was when I was flying to the States on my own a few years ago, and I had a connection at Heathrow. And it was a very narrow window between the flight from Dublin landing in Heathrow and the flight from Heathrow taking off from New York.
That is stressful. I'll give you that.
Oh my God. Okay. Especially when you have to change terminals and go through security again, and you're worrying if your bag made it across as well.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh my God. And I must have been awful, because I was like, there was a few people who were on security who were like, don't worry, sir, you're going to get through.
I'm telling you to calm down.
But I wasn't like freaking out. I wasn't like roaring at anybody or that. But I just must have looked like I must have been sweating and just red from running through Heathrow, which is the world's largest maze.
Fair, okay, that is
horrible. I wouldn't wish it on.
My thing about travelling I find stressful is just I rarely do hand luggage only because of the liquids. Like the liquids, I just can't cope with the liquids.
Shannon Airport has a solution.
It takes so many mils to like pull myself together every day. Like I just can't.
But the liquids rule is such nonsense, because I've flown a couple of times since we had kids, and you're flying abroad with a flask full of boiling water so that you can make a formula bottle on board if the need arises. But you are.
Are you?
If it's for feeding a baby, they're like, a litre of scalded boiling water.
I've had 100 ml bottle of perfume taken off me. Like almost cried at security.
Another
one
for
like shedding tears at security as they removed the DKNY from my bag. I was like, no.
I did the Scottish independence referendum in Scotland. Obviously, that's where it would be.
Yes.
And I was going back to Edinburgh Airport, and I was like, I'd bought, and again, this is so stupid because you know the rules. I'd bought in Edinburgh a really nice bottle of Scotch whiskey, and I was like, this would be great. Now this is nice, but I was just dog tired from the whole week of it, and I was just like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Just get to the airport, get to the scanner thing, and I tried to put my bag through with it, and they're like, can't bring that through here. I was like, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to drink it now? Like, and he's like, no. And he just put it in this. And clearly I'm not the only person. There was a whole stack of all these really lovely bottles of whiskey just piled up at security. And I was like, man, you can make a fortune on how stupid people are.
That's what you get for supporting the untrue whiskey, the whiskey that's spelled without the E. The different inferior product. That's what you get.
Yeah.
Do you remember time we went on that whiskey tour in Edinburgh?
Yeah.
The little roller coaster thing.
There you go. That's our tourism recommendation.
Richard and I went on a weekend to Edinburgh.
Sorry, we're dragging this on now a little bit, but I didn't need to know about a roller coaster at the end of a whiskey tour.
So it was a thing. It was a Barrett, was it? You were so excited to
I loved it. It was one of the best tours I've ever done. The Scottish whiskey
Richard was
experience.
like a child in a candy shop.
Edinburgh Castle.
Yeah, it was very good.
It was like one of those It's a Small World Disneyland rides where it just brings you along a little.
I wish that I could. He was so excited. It was
great.
I've never, in all the times I've been friends with you, I've never seen you that excited.
One of the highlights of my life there, that was.
Well, if you have enjoyed this chat about whiskey and other things, we have a small request of you, don't we, Zara?
Yeah, we want you to like, share and subscribe. I feel like we're probably asking you to do that, but I really think it would make a big difference to us. There's been a couple of reviews.
We've had a few reviews in.
Good and bad, let's be honest.
Look, yeah, I'll take the good with the bad in this industry. A good one from 2021 Alana. Amazing team. They bring laughter from darkness that's happening around the world. You guys are such a heartwarming news team. I hope you will have your own show. In the meantime, keep them coming. Your podcast, 100% fun to listen to. I wish you guys the best. I think that's what it says.
Nice one.
Leo V999 says boring, boring, and boring. I mean, I really hope it's
Leo
not the
V.
Punisher. I hope it's not the
Also,
Punisher.
I will note that the date of that review was before we even released an episode. So
sure, look at
thanks, Leo.
Thanks, Leo. Anyway, like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for joining the group chat again for another week. We'll be back next Thursday.
Bye.
Bye.